I want to explain something about how I watch movies, especially when I'm analyzing them for Cinematic Skeptic, because this isn't casual viewing. It's not distraction, it's not passive entertainment, and it's definitely not about chasing hot takes or vibes. It's about slowing persuasion down long enough to see it work. I pause films on purpose. When I pause a movie, it's not because I'm bored, it's because films are designed to keep moving. Emotion resolves quickly, tension releases fast, questions get answered before you have time to interrogate them. Pausing interrupts that process. It creates space for reflection, notes, questions, mapping who's who and what function they serve in the story. And if I'm confused, I don't push forward. I stop, because confusion isn't failure, confusion is data. Notes aren't about answers, they're about orientation. When I take notes, I'm not trying to pin down what the film means. I'm asking, who has power in this scene? What institution is being represented? What problem does this moment solve for the story? Why does this scene exist here at all? I want to know whether I'm being informed or guided, and that difference matters. Then there's structure. And structure isn't necessarily dogma, it's pattern recognition. Most narrative films follow structure whether they admit it or not. There's 3 acts, clear pivots, escalation points you can feel coming. I don't impose structures on films, I recognize the structure that's already there. Frameworks that I have used before come from things like Save the Cat. These aren't sacred rules, they're descriptions of common narrative gravity. Once you see the beats, you can feel when a film is about to reframe, about to escalate, about to relieve pressure. That's usually when I pause. And then there's my background, which is largely behind the scenes and documentary work. Fly on the wall filmmaking, observing sets, watching meaning get negotiated. Once you've seen this, things like scenes being rewritten in the moment, tone salvaged in the edit, meaning shaped by pressure and compromise, you stop thinking of stories as inevitable. You start seeing them as constructed responses to constraints. That lens doesn't shut off when the movie starts. I also watch movies with noise-canceling headphones, not for comfort, but for control, because sound design tells you something as well. When to feel relief, when to fear, when to stop questioning. Music resolves tension faster than logic. Silence pressures attention. Cadence creates authority. I also put on subtitles sometimes. They force you to read what's being said, not just feel how it's delivered. Rhetoric becomes visible. And then there's a later stage analysis where I isolate components. After multiple watches, I sometimes break films apart with picture only and no sound. Who dominates the frame? Who shrinks? Who disappears? And then I do a sound only with no picture. What emotions are being cued? Where does music do ethical work? What does silence cover? At that point, I'm not watching anymore. I'm examining construction. And then I also treat films as thought experiments. I stopped treating films as answers and started treating them as thought experiments. What happens if the law works, but justice doesn't? What happens when procedure outpaces morality? What happens when authority stays calm while harm escalates? Films isolate variables. They don't just tell stories, they test ideas. And that lens doesn't stop at movies. It applies to media, rhetoric, politics, theology, and other institutions. Stories can act as simulations. I'm transparent about this process because stories persuade. They persuade juries, they persuade voters, they persuade cultures. If we don't understand how stories work, we mistake persuasion for truth. So I pause, I rewind, I take notes. Not because I dislike movies and I don't watch things for entertainment ever, but because I respect them enough to take them seriously.